discuss. We have Sangheetha Parthasarathy here with us on the call. Sangheetha, can you hear us?
Yes, I can indeed.
Awesome. Hey, it's great to have you here. And again, letting folks know, even Sangeeta onboarded to our mission, and she has been, in fact, working closely with South Asian folks and helping them with their regulation for so long. She understands the depth, even psychologically as well as psychosomatically. So when she heard about the conference we are hosting, she was very, very excited to help us understand and educate on her expertise and her knowledge. So Sangeeta is today with us to discuss about four forces, one body. She's going to talk to us about patriarchy, attachment, feminism, immigration in the nervous system, all of this combined together in one package. I know this talk is going to be sort of like punch packed and quick paced. Just a quick intro about Sangeeta to the rest of the audience we have here. She is a nervous system coach and a founder of South Asian Somatics, specializing in helping first generation immigrant women leaders reconcile cultural identity, professional ambition, and personal fulfillment all together. She is a Harvard Medical School and MIT educated professional. She has been recognized among the top 100 global healthcare leaders, and she co founded the Chennai Birth Network. Her work is deeply informed by her own experiences, including a transformative home birth, driving her mission to help professionals heal power dynamics and nurture authentic connections in all aspects of life. When I had the first chat with Sangeeta about Vahati, and I knew that, she also had been following Vahati's updates along the way. It was so exciting to connect on so many levels with you, Sangeeta. Just being an immigrant, again, a South Asian immigrant, and also understanding that there are people in the spectrum who recognize the importance of resilience and how it impacts our body altogether. So excited to have you here again. And without spending more time, I'm going to give the stage to you now.
Supreet, thank you so much. I am super excited to be here with all of you. And when Surabhi reached out, I was like, wow, this is almost just a perfect fit. So today's 45 minutes. So I know this topic is vast and we can spend 4 years on this topic and we have 45 minutes. And my goal here is for us to resonate, educate, obviously, but also do a bit more than that. Some parts might be a teensy bit uncomfortable. But, the goal here essentially is to have a safe space where we can um, hopefully have a conversation that is both emotionally deep as well as psychoeducation. So, all right, let me share my screen and let's get out to it. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
You're not seeing yourselves, are you?
We see your screen.
Okay, cool. All right. So my name is Sangheetha. My name is Sangheetha. I'm the founder of South Asian Somatics. Today, we're going to explore how patriarchy, attachment, feminism, and immigration uniquely impact South Asian nervous systems, especially for female, high achieving, first generation immigrant. It's an extraordinary niche, I know. That's why I was so excited to meet Surabhi, and I'm very excited to meet all of you here today. Um, I essentially created this framework because it didn't exist. Nothing like this existed. And yeah, I'm super excited to share this with you today. Bit about me. I was born and raised in India. Achievement orientation. The journey took me to BITS Pilani, master's in computer science, a career in SaaS, startups, worked my way up. customer success, account management, sales, culminating in strategic pre-sales at Adobe, global, fast-paced, very box standard, I think, in the Indian immigrant experience. But there was a parallel journey going on. My own journey to inquire about all of this began with the birth of my own children. After that, I became a birth doula. And it sparked a lot of interest in how we process the stress and trauma. I always say that there is so much similarity between the birth room and the boardroom. And yeah, that work took me to studying with Dr. Stephen Porges, Dr. Deb Dana, Dr. Peter Levine, and many others. And what I noticed was that despite the effectiveness of all of these approaches to nervous system, they didn't account for the uniqueness of the female, brain chemistry and neurobiology, as well as the immigration as a big event on the nervous system, as well as the fast-paced intellectual nature of this immigrant, experience. And it makes us successful, but it also disconnects us from our bodies. And there's this pressure to be the model minority, and we have all the perfect storm for long-term dysregulated nervous systems. And that's what we're going to explore today. Okay, so the plan is, I hope you can see this. We're going to do a little bit of understanding of nervous system basics. We're going to go into these forces. We're going to talk about how it impacts the body. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about my framework, okay? And as you can see here, I would love to connect individually with each of you, and understand, what resonated or didn't. So, all right. Now, some of you might have seen, are you able to see all of this? Or is it being...
Now it is clear. Yes, the previous slide was a little bit blurry.
Okay, hold on a second. I think I need to move this to where okay. Yeah, this is fine. Cool. So, the two green lines here, that is our window of presence or tolerance. And that's where we function effectively. The green line that you see, now sympathetic is the mobilizing part of our nervous system, and the parasympathetic is the rest and digest. And in a functional nervous system, we're in the green, we're doing resting, and that goes on like that. What happens is that a lot of times when we're stuck with chronic stress, and this is different from, I have a meeting due in a week, so this week has been a slightly more stressful than the others. I'm talking about, what we call big T, like visa anxiety, for example, is a 15 to 20-year pattern on the nervous system, right? So these are chronic activations. So that's what, we define here. So as you can see, when we're in this window, we can think clearly, connect with others, respond appropriately to challenges. But over a period of time with chronic stress, for us South Asian women, the window itself becomes narrower, as you can see here. And then we bounce between hyperarousal, which is the fight flight, the anxiety, panic attack, always on, plan B, plan C, plan D, plan Z, and or the hypoarousal, which is freezy in nature, where there's numbness, disconnection, and the three S's, the sugar, screen, shopping. Okay. Now, this is another way to look at our nervous system as a ladder. Now, in the top of the ladder, the green, is your ventral vagal state. Ventral means the front of the face, social engagement. This is the piece that develops when we're born through attuned caregiving. This is where you feel safe, connected, creative. Now, if this is threatened in any way, we go one step down the ladder, and this is where there's danger. And then if it doesn't get resolved, we go further down into dorsal vagal, which is the life threat, right? So that's where we shut down. What's fascinating is how we South Asian women tend to navigate this ladder. Now, many of us have learned to function, like our home away from home tends to be here in the orange zone. Always alert, always high achieving. And we've been taught that this ventral vagal, which is the rest, play, connection, must be earned through productivity, We also often experience the dorsal collapse around authentic expression. Voice gets quieter during conflict. Um, but so the traditional ways of looking at this is to say that this needs to be your biological or autonomic home where you're spending a lot of time. And that when we find ourselves here or here, we find reliable ways to come back. However, many of us have learned to figure this is a mid state called the functional freeze, where we're going through life's motions, getting the kids to school, doing the, whatever needs to be done, but not really there because the handbrake is on, right? So this is metabolically very costly on the body. So we're going to talk more about this as we go through it, which leads me to these four forces. And again, this we could talk about it for 4 years. So I'm going to, you know, um, hit the most important pieces of this puzzle. The first of which is patriarchy. Again, we can spend the rest of the time on just this one slide, but let's explore this. So patriarchy isn't just about men having power over women, but it's a complex system that's upheld by these things. The internal colonialism that we all carry, South Asian bodies, the rest is for the weak. Religion-based structures where people and institutions are framing women's bodies itself as inherently sinful, as opposed to men's thoughts that are prone to sin because of the women, and the way that we come into relationship with our bodies being the body is temporary, soul is permanent, that sort of thing. And all of these stories inherently are not good or bad, but it there's a lot of exploration to be done on how this affects the way we come into being and the way we relate to our own body and be present in the body. And then you have capitalism equating self-worth with net worth. And, that GDP is progress. And that's the singular measure by which we determine progress itself. And then a lot of times what happens is women become the torchbearers of patriarchy, and men also being trapped by impossible standards and hence seeking disconnection and power at all costs, and or seeking disconnection and numbing and more. And then you have, the geopolitical structures demanding that we justify our very existence. This is the context in which we are situating our bodies, and this is the starting of how we build nervous system pattern and stories around this. So some of the ways in which it shows up for us is beauty standards, Eurocentric expectation, disembodied, commoditized ways in which we look at ourselves. Achievement is safety. We had to be 3x better than our male cousins to be afforded the same opportunities sometimes. And the emotional labor expectations, being the nice girl, being people pleasing, and the real struggle between work being its own reward that we're told in our spiritual practices and cultural stories. So, a lot of times we have no problems being the subject matter experts, the reliable one, the work mom, sometimes the work elder sister, and we accelerate quickly to senior roles. But then there is that cusp between, needing to find a seat at that table and move from being reliable to more strategic because of these, internalized stories. But in the body, it shows up as, tummy troubles before a big conflict. That's the dorsal vagal. It's all under the diaphragm, before big, conflict-driven conversations. It shows up as replaying difficult conversations, maybe at dinner, sometimes mouthing what you should have said or done. It's constantly either ruminating about the past or anxiety about the future, but not being in the moment. Sometimes driving a car gets really hard after big events like, I don't know, big stint in a toxic workplace, grief, loss, etc., resistance to pleasure, shallow breathing, tight jaw, chronic tension, migraine, digestive issues, sleep disturbances that somehow worsen during, performance reviews, family gatherings, sometimes even booking the India trip, right? But these are not psychological responses; they are physiological responses, and that's the key, takeaway here. The second and third force we're going to do together, and this is what I call the feminism attachment tug. In fact, I would love to run, and am I a bad feminist if, session if we had the time. But feminism rightly fights for women's equal participation. It saved our asses. It got us educated and out of overt gender oppression, out of India. And that's great. And, and what happens is, in its modern expression, it sometimes devalues caregiving and connection, precisely what early attachment neuroscience show us that we need. This creates a big conflict, especially for parents or those who are considering parenthood, because, for us immigrant women, we're navigating between connected parenting aspirations like co-sleeping or breastfeeding or a more attuned start to life if we become parents, or if we're in the process of considering that. But this becomes really intense. The issues very fraught here. This is what I call the valley of patriarchy. It happens around the reproductive phase in a marriage, where specifically the woman feels let down by the system, right? Because systemically it prioritizes profits over people. So you're not supported enough time off to bond or heal, but you also don't have the traditional village, and therefore we do our best, and we have parents on call who are probably older, also having to do it without their support, there's a lot of resentment, right? And marriages that get over this value of patriarchy come out on the other end very strong. But unfortunately, it takes a big toll on both partners and children. And there's a lot of functional freeze type marriages where there is good enough parenting roles but a resignation, major loss of attachment needs, and we get stuck in situations or type of marriages that we swore we'd never get into. And so what is it really like, right? So it the career versus caregiving, right, where we're celebrated for our professional achievements, judged for choosing, extended maternity leave. This is a no-win situation. It triggers a lot of shame, but we also buy into systemic devaluing of caregiving roles and internally sort of harass ourselves to work twice as hard as the men we hired to prove to the world, to ourselves, our mother-in-law, that we still got it after maternity breaks. But even sometimes when the cost is too much, or we are in toxic workplaces, or would rather be present with young ones, we're constantly comparing ourselves in both angles and coming up short on both ends. Even when we have supportive partners who would love to support us, sometimes we feel like a burden and don't want handouts, and shift into deep shame spirals sometimes when we then get dysregulated at the children, or we see terror on their faces. But let's explore the chemistry behind this, specifically in the body. So when we're navigating pregnancy, birth, and early childhood as a clinical and a logistical event, it interferes with bonding because cortisol, adrenaline, the stress hormones that our bodies produce when we're stressed or in a chronic state of stress about visas, fear of losing jobs, conflict with in-laws, the big T stress. It interferes with the production of oxytocin, which is the love hormone, the bonding hormone. We need lots of it for conception. We need lots of it for birth to start and progress naturally. We need tons during breastfeeding. And now the issue is when the system has all this adrenaline, oxytocin's not getting produced. And then we feel disconnected in those key inflection points in life when we need these oxytocin floods. This makes quite a few of our years very traumatic, isolated, lonely. Sometimes we have the COVID pregnancy where there is, extra added isolation. And this leads to resentment, lots of confidence, what's the point type questions. Okay, so that's that bit. And then we're going to do immigration now, and I'll bring it all together. One of the big, profound biochemical and psychological event that impacts our nervous system directly is immigration. So we don't just change locations, we alter our entire physiological ecosystem from light exposure to social connections to food and gut and our microbial world. So, we think of ourselves as humans with a little bit of bacteria or, whatever gut, microbes, but we have 3 to 4 times more microbes than we have cells. So we're actually a big blob of, uh, you know, uh, a microbial world that is constantly interacting with the body and the brain and the gut, sometimes even altering genetic, expressions. And this is rarely discussed of how this creates regulation or dysregulation. And a lot of methods, conveniently misdiagnose or reduce the impact of this. Some of the ways in which we experience this is, dark-skinned women experience 4 to 5 times more seasonal affective disorder in northern climates. There are hormonal fluctuations that trigger anxiety, depression, and executive functioning challenges. The disruption in microbiome, dramatic changes in food, temperature, alter the gut-brain axis, affecting mood and much more. And then we have this identity recalibration, the constant code switching between cultural norms, being American at work and Indian at home, or trying to be, and, not knowing where we land. And, the system takes a long time to fully relax into that home, setting. Now, this manifests as the dorsal vagal collapse, seasonal energy crashes, sometimes chronic inflammation over a period of time, because the cost of living in this sort of low grade stress over a period of time can really compound and add to the allostatic load, which is the cost of doing business, cost of showing up. Cognitive patterns, tell me if this is relatable. Um, Procrastination followed by a last minute hyperfocus and just knocking it out of the ballpark. This works for us for a long time, and then we get older, and then we get hormonal changes if we're going through pregnancy, etc. Then we think it's brain fog due to motherhood. But actually what it is hypothalamus pituitary adrenal and the axis that produces the stress hormones, recruiting that to finish tasks, while that was only meant to be recruited for emergency situations, like there is a lion and I need to escape, right? Like life or death situations. So it is the body's emergency circuitry and recruiting that for day-to-day functions to get a project done and turned in on time is highly costly metabolically. So then our endocrine systems get short, and then it shows up as metabolic issues with, diabetes, like, all kinds of ways in which our system goes out of whack. So, I mean, and sometimes these patterns are misdiagnosed with ADHD, depression, or anxiety, when they're actually very specific patterns of nervous system dysregulation. Now, the good news is that our brains and our biology is neuroplastic, which means that they can be rewired at any age. So I'll start with hope, right? Now, there are 3 myths about what works or what doesn't. So one is more is more. So the more that we do, the faster or the bigger changes that we see. And that's not true when it comes to the nervous system. We need precise, nuanced ways in which we work. The second thing is that fast is good and slow is bad. And again, when it comes to pacing, it's very important to work with a pace that feels good, where there is just enough challenge that the patterns are rewired, but not so much that the system shuts down and goes into stress production mode. The third and the most important thing is that time heals everything, and everybody has a little trauma, everybody has a little stress. That's not what I'm talking about, right? So, unfortunately, neurons that wire together fire together. And then when we replay these big, uh, you know, memories and stuckness and dysregulation episodes over and over again, those trauma patterns get stronger. So the core takeaway here is that I love all of these practices. I do all of these practices. I have done them from time to time, but I'm going to talk very specifically about why popular wellness practices that, apps, Google, YouTube, really don't serve fast-paced nervous systems effectively, because these are very valuable tools. However, when we're in this chronic state of dysregulation, there is an internal alarm that's saying danger, danger, danger. I have to be hyper vigilant or else. Right? When we do that, then sometimes the meditation aids the freeze responses, like, okay, there's 30 tabs open in my head, and what do I do about this? Right. And again, I love all of these. I've done all of these at various points in life, but it's very important to sequence them in the right way. And this is why I think a lot of us struggle with some of these practices, because, again, the journaling, I can't continue it, and then I go down shame spirals. The gratitude thing, again, for fawn or a peace-based nervous systems, that is a big part of the South Asian immigrant woman's nervous system response. It sometimes exacerbates that fawn response. Mindfulness, again, with safety, amazing. Without safety and co-regulation there are parts where we might struggle with. So how do we do this, and what do we do? And so this is my 3-step process on how to shift nervous system patterns and go from being chronically dysregulated and reactive to responsive. And the first step is that we reset the safety detector. So this chronic stress or trauma over a period of time, what it does to our amygdala, which is the safety detector piece, is that it is chronically overactivated, which means that we're not able to stand down. Before we do anything else, it is very important to reset that switch so it reacts appropriately to a threat and stands down. But more importantly, it doesn't get stuck on off, where actual threats don't register as threats on the system, right? So we don't, we have to just rewire that thermostat. And that's what we do as the first step in the work that we do together. We do that with a combination of auditory healing protocols that help the vagus nerve calm down and more. Once we do this, it's then that we can shift deeper patterns of nervous system responses to threat, to trauma healing. Once we do that, we go into wound, because a lot of times we go into looking at power as a 0 or 1 thing. So there's a perpetrator, there's a victim, maybe there's a savior, and then we become very ambivalent about power. And then we're also very scared of being successful, because we think, what if I get abandoned, or what if I become the bad guy? Boss or the sass, the proverbial, sass. Right? So a lot of times we struggle with understanding how much power is enough in our body. And then we're moving between, I don't want to be the doormat, but I don't want to be the difficult girl boss either. And then I'm finding myself in all of these from a cognitive perspective. However, my body is so used to either collapsing and appeasing, right? Or yelling and, being dysregulated, right? So when we shift, what happens is that we're able to hold enoughness of power without having to go into these dichotomies and binaries. Once we do that, we have power, presence, and pleasure. This is another way to look at it. The same 3 steps, but just laid out in this way, because once we do that, you see shifts in all areas of your life. All right. And, I'm putting this out here because yeah, I think a lot of us come into it with when there is some life event or trigger, we do some self-reflection, some dots start connecting. And if you're anything like me, become a personal growth enthusiast. And we know all the theory, we've listened to all the podcasts, all the books, we've sought help here and there. And then we go into trying self-coaching or therapy of some kind. And while that might, a client beautifully described it as a necessary but not sufficient condition. And then they're like, okay, now I really need to go deep and go into the root of it. So this is a phase where a lot of clients come to me for the work. What does the transformation look like? I just want to play two less than 1 minute clips. Uh, just give me a minute. Hmm, let's try this first.
Hi, Sangheetha. I think you would have to stop sharing and start sharing with sound for us to hear the clip.
Yeah.
Okay, let's try and do that. Okay, let me do that.
There's like a small option on Zoom to share with sound.
Yeah, that okay. That is on. Okay, hold on. Yeah. Okay, let's try this now.
You're feeling, what does it look like?
It's
And for me, it was very
Hear it?
we can't. No, I mean
yeah.
yeah, the voice is really, really blurred. So we can't
Okay.
Sounding a little glitchy.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you'd like, you can send me the link and I can take over the screen share and play it. How about that?
Yeah, let's do that.
Mhm.
Okay. Let me now share.
Okay, I'm gonna try to play it
Yeah, there
now.
are two less than 1 minute clips.
Yep. Okay. So I'm gonna share my screen and try to play it. Um, Let me know if the voice is blurred. Feel free to interrupt me directly and say you can't hear it. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, let me try to present it.
You sort of gave
Is the voice clear?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay.
the assignment of what does the color look like? Like if you were to paint, what you're feeling, what does it look like? And for me, it was very rewarding to reconnect with hope, the feeling of hope and feeling hopeful, because when I started this, I was numb. I did not have hope. And that was very it was just beautiful to feel. It was I think you asked me what color does it feel like. It feels yellow, it feels bright, it feels like the yellows and the oranges of the fall leaves, and that hope is beautiful to reconnect with.
Amazing. I guess there's one more slide.
Thank you. This is okay, I think. I can. Yeah, there's a couple more slides. Do you just want to drive? And then I'll take questions.
Sure. Let me wait. Did I get out of the presenter mode? Okay. I can drive. You can continue speaking.
Yeah, hold on. Yeah. Yeah. So I think one of the most important truths that I want you to take away from today is that trauma steals time, this chronic dysregulation, right? So the greatest cause isn't the symptoms themselves, but looking 10 to 20 years later, wondering where time, or hey, I might have made different choices, and that's thing. No, it was gold for your grandmother, it was education, and maybe a job for your mother. Maybe it was a career, Ivy League degrees, a Tesla or two for you. But the best gift we can give our future generation is a well-regulated nervous system and a childhood they don't have to heal from. That's their unfair advantage. That's your unfair advantage. And, you know, um, that's kind of the core. Next slide. And if this resonates with you and you like support in transforming these patterns, let's explore. I have something called the Unfair Advantage Club. This is my comprehensive program that addresses all four forces and more through a lot of personalized coaching, assessments, and neuroscience-based, step-by-step, logical, I can see and quantify my changes kind of support with a very small community of support and group aspects as well. And, designed specifically for the South Asian women's nervous system. Next slide. Thank you for joining me today. You can find more resources on my website. You can connect with me on social media. I have a free course that introduces some of the basic practices that I mentioned today. Just remember, your nervous system is worthy of care, not because you're broken, but because you deserve to thrive as opposed to just surviving. So yeah, I look forward to connecting with you and supporting you on your journey.
Thank you so much, Sangheetha. I think the last sentence you mentioned, not just because we all want to survive, but thrive. That's kind of like the whole concept of Vahati, and also the theme for this conference, right? We all say that we step forward towards a thriving journey as an immigrant in US. We'll also include these resources and the link to your website, Sangheetha, in our newsletter. And lastly, we have a few questions coming in, so we want to make sure, yeah, let's take a few minutes.
Yes.
So the first question is from Subhashini, where she's asking, could we share a few practical tools which we can use for the getting out of these longer periods of stress, chronic stress, impacting our
Yeah.
body, or
Yes.
for identifying it?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was thinking about, doing something experiential here. I didn't know if we'd have the time or not, but okay. The key thing that shifts this for a lot of us is to differentiate the state from the story. What I mean by that is, when we start this work, like I said, we're very neck up, right? Intellectual. If you ask me to describe my feeling, I can do that. But like what do you feel in the body, and how do you feel in the body can be a very alien place for many of us. And so the key here is not to mm, go all in and try and be in the body at all times. That should never be the goal of trauma healing. However, what we can do is microdose small moments of noticing what happens in the body. So maybe we can let's do a very quick 2 minute, and this I would do in an elaborate way in a personal session, but just for time's sake, right? Let's do something here. You all can follow it along with me, right? Imagine you're driving to the beach in a car. Everything you want to do for that day is already taken care of. Maybe you have loved ones in the car. Maybe it's just you and you're enjoying this. Favorite music, bright, windy, you know, you're just looking forward to an amazing day together, in the beach, whether by yourself or with loved ones. Check in with what happens in the body when you're in this state, when everything else has been taken care of. Maybe the breathing, maybe the heartbeat, feet, hands. Yeah, just making some mental notes here. Now, just as you're pulling in, there's something that comes, a truck that comes from the opposite side, and they almost hit you. Take some time and notice what happens in the body. Is it like shifts in your hand, feet, maybe sweaty palms, heartbeat, maybe numbness? Yeah. And then maybe, the person gets off and they shout at you like it's your fault. Just for a little bit, just track what's happening here. And now imagine, your partner, loved one, friend comes to you, and suddenly there's a police officer on scene, and they say, hey, that's not your fault. Why did you drive like that? Takes care of the situation. Checks in with you if you're okay, or if you need a minute, or you need some water. Check what that empathy feels like in your body. And let's spend some time here. Feet, hips, spine, jaw. Yeah. Now imagine going to the beach and having a really calm, rested day. Okay. The reason I did this very short exercise is because what we did was we started in ventral vagal, safety. Then we added a threat, the fight flight. Sometimes some of us were activated and, heart rate, dry mouth, the metabolism stops because everything is gone to the extremities because the body thinks, let's fight. Some of us went straight down to that handbrake numbness, and that's fine. And then we added another layer of threat, right? Track what happened in there. Then we brought safety in the form of a loved one, police officer, something that rectified the situation, and then tracking that journey up the ladder to safety again. And tracking really what happened in the body. So in the chat, quickly tell me what was that like for you in terms of sensations?
Folks, feel free to turn on your audio if you like.
Yeah.
I can share real quick. We've had similar discussions in the past events with Bhati as well, and the wave of those feelings goes like, hey, there is an ocean breeze. Then there's a sudden shock, there's a jerk, and the body feels very stiff all of a sudden. Then there is numbness, like followed by that, and not much cognition at that point. That's kind of like the first half of the story. And the part where you mentioned someone checking in on you with empathy goes kind of like trying to come back to normal. That part and the timing to come back to normal varies between individuals, and the jerk that just happened before that.
Exactly. That's why I said it's a very, very abbreviated version, right? So when we're working one-on-one, we would track that sensory motor response very, very slowly, and help the body complete what it couldn't do. For example, press the brake, or, if there's a physical act that it needed to complete, then we would sequence it differently. But this is just the reason I wanted to do this exercise really quickly is because a lot of times it's about really getting in touch with what's happening this is one of the things, not the whole thing, but the main thing is differentiating between the state and the story. Because when I'm in the fight flight, the telltale sign of fight flight, again, if there's one thing you're taking away from today, is whenever you feel like you're out of time and out of options, That's your sympathetic fight and flight state. So imagine already being chronically dysregulated and in a fight and flight state and approaching problem solving or connection or whatever it is. There's a flavor of, I'm running out of choices, I'm running out of options. And then when you're in the dorsal, the numbness, it feels like connection doesn't even exist. Not that connection is dangerous, but, they don't exist. It's a flavor of invisibility. I'm going to immobilize to stay safe. That numbness that I talked, the 3 S's, right? Reaching for sugar, there's the biochem, there's a high and then there's a low, right? So there's a numbing effect to that. And then the scrolling, the mindless consumption, and those things are a flavor of, the system being in that handbrake state, And then so once we befriend this biology, make friends with it, we're able to work with that, in a very kind of simple, practical way, because then, we have options suddenly. And then that, we can separate the state from the story that we tell ourselves, like, oh, this is so bad and it's all going to be a mess and what's the point, and all of that. Cool.
Anyone else want to share their experiences? If not, we have one more question that I would really, really like to go with. It's a question from Nupur. Step 2 in the journey is self-reflection. What specific tools or methods do you recommend for fostering meaningful self-reflection, particularly for those who may find it challenging, as it can lead to resurfacing of overwhelming emotions? Absolutely. Yeah, like it's painful to,
Oh, yes.
right?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. That's a fantastic question. Self-reflection for shame-dominant nervous system. I'll say, see, a lot of us grew up in households, and I think this is also globally, where sometimes the only allowed emotion was anger. Everything else, it was very hard for us to stay with discomfort, especially shame. So then we would run away from it and then either make ourselves really big and therefore not experience it, or really small and helpless where it's all our fault, right? So then that's a beautiful question. So self-reflection, and so again, we're not aiming for accuracy here necessarily, right? But it's just about a start of the journey of, hold on a second, I reacted this way, and am I just playing back what was familiar, or did that come from a more intentional place, etc. And not, again, I wouldn't go for accuracy here, right? And then also, if we have a very critical parts to us, and we are perfectionists and we blame ourselves and hold us up to impossibly high standards. And so when we do that, self-reflection also becomes a performance sport, right? We sort of almost go into this endless, self-awareness for self-awareness sake almost, right? And then that gets in the way of, living life. But that's a beautiful question as to how do I do that? I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it, as much as just having a filter. Don't go for accuracy is what I'm saying, right? Because if we have a bias towards being very hard on ourselves, or have a bias towards, blaming externals, then the self-reflection is really not going to, and it doesn't matter, right? But I think don't go for accuracy. This is more of a curiosity. I would approach it with just curiosity. It's like, hey, I'm curious about this. This is my behavior, or this is my, viewpoint or action. And I'm just going to be very curious about why, and then see what happens.
Yeah. One of the things that, so me not being a psychologist, but just knowing what that resurfacing of overwhelming emotions can feel like, especially when going through some of these situations where you almost feel like it's a fight or flight situation. Even in reality, it's not, but the body feels that way. from my personal experiences, it has never helped doing a self-reflection in that moment. It's just that is a waste of time, and it's actually harmful. It needs to settle down for some time in your mind and like come out of that initial shock. And then go with that curiosity that you mentioned, Sangeeta. And sometimes I also do it with the closest of my trusted friends who I know can be my sounding board. So the bias can be, slightly taken away from, who are not going to exactly like sympathize immediately, saying everything you say is right. But at the same time, they empathize enough to know where I come from. I think that has
Yeah,
helped. Yeah.
that's the co-regulation piece, right? The connection and co-regulation. That's one of the best ways for us, quickest ways to come back to safety when we have it. And when we don't, exactly what you said, that self-reflection piece is executive function. That's our brain, the front brain. And that's the first thing that goes offline when safety is when we're in fight, flight, or freeze. Now we're at the mercy, we're hijacked. Remember the amygdala, the safety detector that's saying danger, danger, danger. So the thinking brain has gone offline. Now we're at the mercy of more primitive systems, right? So the work is not done then. This is why I'll just answer this one question, which kind of really feeds into this. Pratyusha, your question about, I know this cognitively, but I'm not able to put it in practice when the triggers happen. Yes, because the amygdala is hijacked, and then you can't really go into your tool library and get the right thing there. So the work is not done at that point. So when we do nervous system regulation, first thing that happens is after you've had a dysregulation episode, that brain comes in and you're reflecting. Then slowly you're catching yourself in the middle of it. And then very slowly you're catching the start of it. And then you're catching the one before the start of it, because you know that the body is accelerating or decelerating now. Then the pause between the stimulus and the response organically happens, right? You're not counting down or forcing it, and then you're able to respond instead of react. And so that's how the work works. It's very organic. It's not cognitive, because you can't go into your script library because that's offline now. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. And I want to take one last question, folks. Before we wrap up the session today, I want to let everyone know that we are going to conduct more sessions with Sangheetha in future. And for those of you who are interested in diving deeper and the amazing topics she has to offer, like today she had a very limited time, and the amount of expertise you shared with me over the call, I feel like there's so much more to uncover. And maybe we can do that in those follow-up workshops. So whoever wants to stay in touch with us for the updates from Bhati, please fill in the quick interest form we have so that you'll keep getting the updates and also when those workshops are happening from our end. We're going to take one more question, and then we have Nancy coming in for mindfulness session. So the last question for
So
Sangeeta. Go ahead, Sangeeta. Yeah.
is that Deepti's one?
Deepti has one question for
Okay,
you. And then Nancy is coming in for the next session with us. Yep.
got
Uh,
it.
yep. Go ahead, go ahead.
Okay. Yes. More is more, fast is better. Do you think starting earlier versus later could be more effective in self-healing? Yeah, now let's say you're unhealthy. Yeah. See, the amazing thing about the brain is that it is neuroplastic, which means that we can heal at any age. Many of us who did not have, like what you're explaining, right? The unhealthy parent, a lot, many more of us grew up in chaotic homes, sometimes joint families or joint-ish families where there was power, and so the health, mental health, economic survival, and many more, And so it is very common for a lot of us to find this work later in life. And I don't think earlier, I mean, for example, in the context of when I want to raise children, so many of us are in this work or want to be doing this work because we want our children to have a better, social, emotional, mental health start to life, right? So we want to, do better, right? And so I understand it from that context. But, for Deepti's question, absolutely, there's no, age limit for this. I remember working with a 68-year-old, I'll tell the story many times, a 68-year-old woman who carried birth trauma all these years, and she came in, and it was so beautiful how it changed for her and how she was able to rewire her, or revector her relationship with adult children and grandchildren, right? And it was just so beautiful to watch, and it's one of the best stories that I tell. So no, I don't think the age is a factor in that sense.
Deepthi, I think you are on mute. If you're saying
Oh, I said thank you. That was helpful, Sangheetha.
You're
Thank
very
you
welcome.
so much, Sangheetha. It was a pleasure having you today with us. And thank you so much for also fueling to the mission of Vahati. For those of you who don't know, Sangheetha, for those of you who joined us later, Sangheetha is the founder of South Asian Somatics. And with Sangpath, she has been working with folks internationally across the board for this diaspora, helping them as a nervous system regulation coach. And thanks again. It was wonderful learning from your background when we met first, and today when you actually covered so many things in a short amount of time. Looking forward to having more deep dive sessions with you, Sangheetha. Thank you so much.
Lovely to be here. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. And oh, go ahead.